Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the UPSC point of view. So let's start today's discussion by taking the important articles which feature in the New Delhi edition of the newspaper. So let's take up the first article for our discussion. The first article which appears on our screen, which features in the newspaper, reads, "A push for the semiconductor industry." Now this is an important article which features in the newspaper because this talks about the ever increasing important product known as the semiconductor chips. Now semiconductor chips, the name might come as a very new name to us, but in essence, whatever objects we are using right now in our day-to-day life, basically it is this semiconductor chips that is powering those devices. So all these electronic devices, be it our phones, smartphones, computers, they are all being used by and they are run by the semiconductor chips. And who makes these semiconductor chips? There should be some country or some manufacturing giant in this world who makes this semiconductor chips. So these giants supply semiconductor chips to all other countries, especially to India. And in this backdrop, we know that the world order is increasingly changing with Russia-Ukraine war and tensions between US and China, China and Taiwan. So in all of these circumstances, the semiconductor industry has come to a lot of focus, where India does not want to rely on other players who are manufacturing these semiconductor chips and wants to become self-reliant, right? Which is the motto with respect to other aspects of as well, making India Atmanirbhar. So in respect to semiconductor chips as well, India wants to be self-reliant in the production of semiconductors. So in this backdrop, we'll understand what is the whole issue about semiconductor sector, what are basically semiconductors, what are their uses, what is the status of this industry, then what is India doing in order to boost its production into semiconductor chips manufacturing in India, what are its benefits and what are its challenges that exist with respect to this policy as well. And the new article is appearing because currently the government has made certain changes in this policy for the semiconductors. So we'll take a look at all of that. So first try to understand what exactly is a semiconductor. So as the photo suggests, this small chip which we see inside PCs or smartphones is nothing but a semiconductor chip, which is basically the brain for the device, which does all the computational functions that the device needs to perform. This is the chip that is doing those computational functions. So that is why this is the basic building block of any electronic device. So these semiconductors are thumbnail sized building blocks of almost every modern electronic device, from smartphones to connected device in the Internet of Things. There is a concept called Internet of Things. Those of you are not aware of Internet of Things, it is basically, one can say that those electronic objects which can be operated by Wi-Fi or they can be connected to the internet and therefore operated remotely. This is possible due to the concept of Internet of Things, wherein internet would also be there in everyday electronic equipments and they would be operated through that internet. So all of these semiconductors make possible the existing technological devices and the devices that are yet to come. They help give computational power to these devices, as I mentioned. And the global semiconductor industry, when we are seeing that almost in every electronic field the semiconductor is relevant, so obviously the sector would be very large. So this global semiconductor industry is currently valued at $500 to $600 billion. That's how huge the semiconductor industry is. And who are the major players who manufacture the semiconductors in the world? So the major players are Taiwan, China, South Korea and USA. These are the major countries which are the major players in manufacturing semiconductors. Now, what is the semiconductor made of? The basic component of a semiconductor is a silver of silicon. So it's basically a silicon based object. That is why the name Silicon Valley, which we see in USA, which is etched with billions of microscopic transistors forming patterns to control the flow of current while flowing different computational instruction. This is how the chips work, wherein it has different microscopic transistors which facilitate flow of current, and that is how information and current is traveling through them for performing computational functions. This chip making process, now one can say that when we manufacture semiconductors, it's just the manufacturing of these small chips, but is the manufacturing of these small chips very easy? This chip making process is a very complex and highly exact process, because you have to make small objects but very precise and very different in its orientations as well. So it's very complex and highly exact, having multiple other steps in the supply chain, such as designing software for chips, patenting them through the core intellectual property. One should also know that these semiconductor chips are also a part of what we call intellectual property. What is an intellectual property? An intellectual property is, we have tangible property, land, others, house, this is all physical tangible property. But intellectual property is that which is a manifestation of the mind. So something which the mind has thought and is unique in character can be protected via the intellectual property rights. So a semiconductor chip also forms a part of such unique invention by the mind, and that is why can be protected with the intellectual property rights. So therefore, the manufacturing and making of the chips, of the semiconductor chips, is a very complex process, and that is why very less countries have been able to master their hold of it. So it involves making chip fabrication machines, setting up of fabs or factories, and ATMP plants, which is assembly, testing, marking and packaging plants. So this is the complex procedure that is involved when we talk about manufacturing semiconductors. So we understood what are semiconductors, the extent of the industry, how complex it is a process to build these semiconductors. Now let's come to the fact that we also saw where they're applied. So now let's come to the fact, what is the need that India is feeling to manufacture these semiconductors in India itself. Now as we saw from the given information itself, we saw that the major countries which are manufacturing these chips are Taiwan, China, between which the tensions are rising, and whenever tensions between these countries rise, whatever commodities they are supplying, and they are part of the larger supply chain of the commodity, that gets disrupted, and the importing countries of these objects, they suffer the losses. And that is why India does not want to be in this fix, and it wants to be self-reliant in the process of manufacturing chip making. So what need does India feel about manufacturing semiconductors for itself? Apart from these geopolitical tensions, there are certain needs, there are many needs with respect to this. First is the national security considerations. When these chips become the building blocks of major electronic devices, does it not become prudent to make these chips for India in India itself? It will greatly impact the security considerations, and therefore India, for its security consideration purposes, wants to construct or manufacture these chips in India itself, right? Then increasing imports. One big aspect is that by heavily importing the semiconductor chips from other countries, it increases the import bill of the country, and that is why India wants to reduce the increasing amount of imports. Then is increased demand and shortage amid COVID. When COVID arrived, we saw that there were disruptions in supply chains of almost all kinds of products, and semiconductors were one of them. And that is why when you do not have the enough supply of semiconductors, but the demand is there, the electronic industry is ever increasing in India. So in order to cater to the demand and cater to the shortage that is coming into the semiconductor chips, India also wants to manufacture semiconductors on its own. Then we have profiting from the anti-Chinese sentiments. Like we saw, the major manufacturing countries of semiconductors are China and Taiwan, and the Chinese economy, one can say that many players are going out of the Chinese economic market. Why is that? Because the advantage which Chinese economy had, that is of the labor intensive, cheap labor, that is diminishing, and therefore various other opportunities are germinating in other countries such as Vietnam, India, and India wants to make use of this anti-China sentiment. Other countries are also already doing it, and that is why India also wants to get on this bandwagon. Then obviously last one is pushing Make in India, right? in tune with the philosophy of making India Atmanirbhar. So these are the various needs due to which India feels that it should be manufacturing semiconductors in India itself. So now, after looking at the need, what is the step that the government took? The government in last year December, that is December 2021, unveiled a new policy which was a production linked incentive scheme for manufacturing semiconductors. We know of the PLI scheme or production linked incentive scheme in various other sectors. This is basically a scheme, as the name suggests, production linked incentive, which is that those manufacturers would be encouraged to produce certain products, and when they will be producing them, they would be incentivized to produce such products. That is the scheme that is known as production linked incentive scheme. And this kind of a scheme was also introduced for the semiconductor chips, wherein those manufacturers who would be manufacturing semiconductor chips, government would be incentivizing them. So the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology approved a comprehensive program for the development of semiconductors and display manufacturing ecosystems in the country. This was the program that was unveiled. And under this program and the scheme, the government proposes to provide incentives worth rupees 76,000 crore for the development of semiconductors and display manufacturing ecosystems over the next 6 years. This was the scheme. This 76,000 crores is around $10 billion worth of support. Now this $10 billion, according to the dollar's value, will get changed as well. But the recent pitch of how much the economic support is going to be for the semiconductor manufacturers is going to be around $10 billion. So as now we come to the crux of today's article as to this particular policy has been amended by the government. Now what have been the amendments? We'll take a look at that. So what are the recent changes that are made in the scheme? So earlier, as we saw, the scheme is basically what? Those people who are manufacturing semiconductors, they would be incentivized, they would be given some concessions or even subsidies. What basically the government has done in its amendment is that it has increased this subsidy. So the government has approved uniform fiscal support of 50% of project cost for semiconductor fabs, which we saw is one of the units that one needs to make for semiconductor manufacturing across technology nodes and display manufacturing. What this means is that whatever cost the semiconductor fab units would incur, 50% of it would be borne by the government. This has been made uniform for all kinds of categories of the semiconductors. This was not so earlier. What was it earlier? Earlier it ranged different percentage for different types of semiconductors. So those nodes from 45 nanometer conductors to 65 nanometer were offered an incentive of 30% of the projected cost. Those between 28 nanometer and 45 nanometer were offered 40%, and only nodes from 28 nanometer and below were offered 50% fiscal support. So this variable fiscal support which was there in the earlier version of the scheme, this has been amended, and now what has been kept is a uniform support for all kinds of categories, that would be 50%. So government has, one can say, increased its leverage into providing support to various units under this scheme. So this is the major change that the government has done, which is the crux of today's article, from which we are taking up this semiconductor issue. So this would be done with what? This would target different technologies. It will include discrete semiconductor fabs, and discrete semiconductors are used for devices performing basic electronic functions. So these would be the appliances or equipments where this policy would apply. So alright, we understood what are semiconductors, where are they used, what is the government doing for them, and how can it benefit. So we saw that government would be basically providing them financial support when it comes to increasing the production of semiconductors in the country. But are there any challenges with respect to this scenario as to what government is doing? Is it enough? So the first point that is coming in these challenges is that when we look at this policy, many experts are saying that the amount which is pledged in this scheme, that is, we saw around $10 billion, right? Experts are of the opinion that this is a very less amount when you want to support this kind of an industry, which is very resource intensive industry. So the semiconductor industry, as we also saw how complex it is a very expensive and resource intensive industry, and therefore supplying only $10 billion initially, the experts say, is a insufficient amount. It's a good start, but it's insufficient. Then this industry is also a very water intensive industry, wherein to manufacture these electrical equipment, ultra pure water is required, and government would have to supply this water, and therefore it can cause a stress on the government's finances and the environment as well. So that is being said as the next challenge. And there is also the problem of missing profits. How is this a problem? Because despite the impressive growth of the electronic production, the net value added by production units is very low. So the profit that is to come from these semiconductor or electronic equipments is yet to come. And the net value addition ranges between 5% and 15%, as most components are imported rather than locally sourced. Then we have the problem of limited indigenous capability in upstream industries, which means that only constructing one part of the semiconductor chipset is not going to solve the problem. The other aspects linked to this industry also need to be manufactured, and industries for those kind of objects also needs to come. So in the era of global supply chains, the value addition at the final stages of production is very low, especially in electronics, because the more complicated processes involving greater value addition occur prior to assembly in upstream industries. So those processes which are earlier involved, that the presence of those industries in India is not there. These include the production of processors, display panels, memory chips, cameras, etc. And therefore manufacturing all these equipments also have to be done. Then we have the concept of absence of foundries. Now foundries are special type of units. These are semiconductor fabrication plants where microchips are produced. These foundries are very less in number. This is the exact thing which the government is wanting to increase, which is why the policy has been brought. But their less in number creates a problem for the booming of the industry in India. So these were some of the points which we saw with respect to the semiconductor sector in India. What is semiconductors? What is the need for boosting it? What is the policy? What is it intending to do? And what are some of the challenges that are involved in the sector? So with this, we finish this article and move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, "Pitching India as a Signature Destination." Now this article is written by, as we can see, G. Kishan Reddy, who is the Union Minister of Tourism, Culture and Development of Northeast region. So this article has been written by the Tourism Minister himself, which talks about India as making India a signature destination, which basically means that he is making a case as to how we can boost India's tourism sector potential. India already is a lot, one can say, proficient in the tourism sector, where tourism sector gives many number of jobs to Indian citizens. It brings foreign direct investment. It also brings a lot of income into the places that these tourist places are involved, and therefore the tourism sector already is, before COVID it was doing well, but there are many more things that needs to be achieved in the tourism sector. So one can say that the true potential of the tourism sector, it's still untapped, and after the shock that COVID gave to the Indian economy, the tourism sector in India is just picking up its pace. So in this backdrop, the author wants to highlight what we can do and what the government is currently doing to make tourism sector in India achieve its full potential. So let's talk about the tourism sector in India. Now whenever we talk about tourism in India, is this sector very new to India? Certainly not. India has been an attractive tourist destination from the ancient times, where we have seen Western travelers, Arab travelers, Chinese travelers continuously arriving to the landmass or the subcontinent of India, wanting to explore, and the features that India has, be those distinct cultural features or geographical features of India, which is, one can say that when we talk about India, India has everything, all kinds of geographical features. The mountains are there, the deserts are there, the beaches are there, all kinds of places are there which make for attractive tourist destination. Therefore, India is a is and has been a very lucrative travel destination from the past times as well. The example for this is where Yuan Sang had visited India. A devout Chinese Buddhist is an example of the tradition of India being a very lucrative travel destination. And now, where this rich tradition is there and India has a distinction of being a very attractive travel destination, now newer forms of travel attractions have come up in India. What are these? One is business tourism, which means that whenever business groups want to make out of their works setting meetings, so such kind of tourism activities are there. This is called business tourism. India can facilitate and holds a lot of potential for that as well. Then there is health tourism or medical tourism. This kind of tourism occurs when people from countries who face medical expenses at a very high rate in their own countries. So people like people living in US, UK, even people living in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, they cannot get either affordable or better health facilities in their own areas, and that is why where do they look at? They look at where can they get effective and cheap medical facilities, which they get in India, and that is why India is increasingly becoming a big hub for health tourism or medical tourism. So this is another aspect. Then we have wildlife tourism. The recent introduction of cheetahs in the Kuno Palpur Wildlife Sanctuary is a step towards that only. So, and apart from this wildlife tourism, there is adventure tourism, which is also something that the government wants to promote. So these different kinds of tourism opportunities are springing up in India. Work is being done to make these avenues more profitable, but the point is that their potential is truly untapped and it can be realized. So they have tremendous potential for growth. This is the scenario with respect to Indian tourism sector. Now let's look at some of the data points with respect to India's tourism sector. What is the number of figures as to how they contribute to the GDP? So India's tourism is ranked at 10th position in terms of its contribution to world GDP in the World Travel and Tourism Council's report in 2019. And during 2019, contribution of travel and tourism at GDP was around 6.8% of the total economy. That's a significant number, where India's tourism sector contributes to around 6.8%, and government wants to increase this percent to around 9 to 10% of India's GDP. That is the target that government wants to set. And the financial year 2020, the tourism sector in India accounted for 39 million jobs, which means that 3.9 crore jobs it supplied, which was 8% of the total employment in the country. And by 2029, it is expected to account for about 53 million jobs. So as we can see, this sector holds huge potential for increasing the jobs in the country as well. That is why the tourism sector in India becomes very important, and one can expect a question on these lines and this sector in the mains examination at any time. So that is the status of the India's tourism sector. Now, what is the significance of this sector? The importance of it we already saw some points. One is the service sector. When a tourism in a region flourishes, it increases the jobs in that region, and therefore it gives a push to the service sector, right? What kind of services do it get benefit? A number of businesses engaged in airlines, hotel, surface transport, all of these grow when the tourism industry grow. Then it brings foreign exchange. Wherever the foreign travelers visit India, that's when it brings much needed foreign exchange into India. Then it works for preservation of national heritage. Whatever national heritage monuments we have, or all these aspects which are very important for India's national heritage, preserving, making them available for tourism also makes a case for preserving them. Then it renews our cultural pride. Preserving of these national heritage monuments instills a cultural pride in Indians as well as in the citizens of India, and also people from outside India, where they get to know the real size and shape of India as to what India really is and how they should be viewing this country. So the tourist spots being appreciated globally instills a sense of pride among Indian residents and also people outside. Then we have infrastructural development that takes place whenever a tourist region gets developed. So let's take any region, one can say, whenever we talk about a region that is not earning by any means, but the only thing that region has are attractive tourist destinations. So one can take an example of that's coming to my mind is of, let's say, Shirdi or these pilgrimage places which does not have any other significance, but the temple over there is a tourist destination where a lot of people visit. So due to that, what happens is that the infrastructure development of the region around that monument starts to take place, and this is what benefits the region. So this is also another significance which is there for tourism industry and the area which is hosting this tourist place. And then it also helps in recognition, where it helps in bringing India on the global map of tourism, earning appreciation, recognition, and initiate cultural exchange, which is very important. This amounts to a lot of soft power, an important concept in the terms of international relations, and then ultimately it promotes cultural diplomacy. Tourism as a form of soft power helps in promoting cultural diplomacy, people to people connect, and thereby promotes friendship and cooperation between India and other countries. To give an example of this, the Bodhi temple in the city of Gaya in Bihar is the place where Gautam Buddha attained his nirvana, one can say, enlightenment. So that region is a special tourist destination for Buddhists all around the world, be that from Sri Lanka or other Southeast Asian nations. So what this does is, when you promote your tourist spots, it promotes a tourist, one can say it becomes an attractive destination for people from outside country as well, which forms a part of the soft power that the country gains. So that is why tourism has a multifaceted role in benefiting India and its interest. So this we saw the significance of the tourism sector and the scope of it. Now let's come to the part where what are the key points of the draft policy of tourism 2022. This is what the article focuses about, and the union minister talks about that when he establishes the importance of tourism sector. What is it that the government is doing to make that sector realize its true potential? This is the outage of draft policy of tourism in the year 2022. When we say draft policy, this is in the stage of deliberations and it is yet to be finalized. And after all the stakeholders give their opinion and it gets finalized, this policy would be notified. And so this is in the draft stages. So let's look at what this policy is trying to do. First objective is that the policy wants industry status to this sector, so that we can call the tourism sector as a tourism industry, wherein to promote investment in tourism sector, the document mentions granting of industry status to the sector along with formally granting infrastructure status to hotels, right? So this is one thing that the policy aims to do, and its work is divided into working in 5 key areas. These 5 key areas would be given significant focus in the next 10 years. What are these 5 key areas? One is green tourism, right? Making everything sustainable and eco-friendly is not just in vogue right now, but also the need of the hour, and therefore focusing on green tourism. Then digital tourism. What would we mean by digital tourism? Making the tourism and its allied activities very accessible and available in the digital means. That is the concept of digital tourism. Then destination management, skilling at the hospitality sector. So the guides, the helpers, all of the people that are involved in the tourism sector in a particular area, managing that destination and skilling of these people in the hospitality sector, then supporting tourism related to micro, small and medium enterprises, those MSMEs which are involved in this tourism sector, promoting them. So these are the 5 key areas which this policy targets. One is the green tourism, digital tourism, destination management, skilling of the people involved and supporting the MSMEs that are involved in the sector. These are the 5 key areas. And what would be given to them, what benefit would be given to them under this policy? They would be relief measures and taxation breaks. So the ways government industries are quite uniform in a lot of sectors. So in the tourism sector as well, the government would be helping them by giving tax breaks, tax holidays. So the industry, which has been the worst sufferer over the last 2 years of COVID, had sent multiple representations to the government, representatives for relief measures as well as taxation breaks. So the policy would be doing that, right? So this is the crux of the policy that is there, the draft policy. But apart from this, what are the challenges that exist in the tourism sector? There are several challenges, because there must be some reasons as to India having such untapped potential with respect to tourism spots is not yet able to fully realize its potential. So what are some of the challenges that exist? First is the lacking in infrastructure. Whenever the challenges of tourism sector are something which we can ourselves think of or write, because all of us visit tourist places. So whenever we visit these tourist places, we see various aspects which are wrong in these places. What are they? We first see that the infrastructure, which is very critical to that place, is lacking. So good accommodation facilities, cheap and affordable accommodation facilities, the sanitation facilities, all of these are not there in good number. The roads leading to these destinations are not well. Government is doing efforts in all these directions to better the infrastructure. Then the next problem which we suffer is of safety and security. In all the tourist spots, if you have to make them accessible and profitable for India's tourism sector potential realization, the most important factor is ensuring the safety of the citizens, especially the foreign travelers in these tourist spots. Then we have the lack of skilled manpower in this region, and that also becomes a major challenge in the tourism sector. And as we already saw, absence of basic amenities like drinking water, well-maintained toilets, first aid, cafeteria at these tourist places looks like a small thing, but is a very critical thing where we have to enhance the experience of the traveler of this tourist place. So these are some of the challenges which exist in the tourism sector, which the draft policy for tourism intends to cure, but whatever aspects are being left out, it should be taking it into consideration. So this was a discussion on India's tourism sector. What exactly is the status of it? What is the government doing to promote it, and what are some of the challenges that exist in the sector? With this, we finish this article, and let's move on to our next and last article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, Center's push for NavIC system lands smartphone giants on unknown land. Now this particular article appears in the newspaper in the context of the NavIC or navigation system that Indian government has inaugurated for itself or launched for itself. Whenever we use our mobile phones, we use the Google Maps. This Google Maps is run by the system known as GPS. This GPS, which is short for Global Positioning System. This is basically the satellite system which is run in US, and we are making basically the use of location services of US's GPS system, and India wants to again achieve self-reliance in this sector as well, and therefore it thinks that there is much more sense to shift to a indigenous satellite system for communication, location and all other aspects for which location is used. So that attempt is known as NavIC. So what this article is talking about, we'll understand that, but first we'll understand what is this navigation system, the important points related to it, and then we'll come to the crux of the article. So what is the navigation with Indian constellation, which is the full form for NavIC technology? This is basically nothing but a cluster of satellites which would be surrounding the earth, and these cluster of satellites would do the needful task of positioning India and giving location based services to everyone in India. So this is an autonomous regional satellite navigation system, also known as Indian Regional Navigation Satellite System. So NavIC also has another name of IRNSS, which is developed by ISRO. So it has been designed to provide accurate position information service to users in India as well as the region extending up to 1500 kilometers from its boundary. So we learnt that ISRO has developed it. It is basically going to provide position information, and the extent of this position is going to be 1500 km from its boundary. That is the important information with respect to NavIC. So what are the kind of services that it is going to perform? It will provide two types of services. One is the standard positioning service, which would be provided to all the users, and what would be restrictive service. This means that there would be some specialized services either for the intelligence system, for the armies, which would not be available to everyone, but would be an encrypted service provided only to the authorized users. Now this IRNS system is expected to provide a position accuracy of better than 20 meters in the primary service area. So basically 7 satellites would be launched in the different orbits of the earth, which would be placed in a manner that they would be recording the information, the location information of India, and would provide the positioning services. So out of these 7 satellites, where all are they going to get launched? So 3 satellites are going to get launched in the geostationary orbit, and 4 satellites are inclined in the geosynchronous orbits. How are these going to launch? Let's see. This is the concept of NavIC system or the IRNS system, wherein the region of Earth, in India especially, would be surrounded by 7 satellites, and out of this 4 would be in geosynchronous and 3 would be in geostationary. Now what do we mean by launching in geostationary orbits or geosynchronous orbits? Let's understand through this simple diagram. Whenever we talk about a geosynchronous orbit, this basically means that orbit around the Earth, which basically matches the Earth's speed to cover a day's time. So whatever time the Earth takes to make a full rotation around its axis, that is 24 hours, we know that. So this particular orbit is also shaped in a manner where the object placed, the satellite placed in this orbit, would be at a same place. It would seem that it is at a same place as if moving with the Earth. That kind of an orbit is known as a geosynchronous orbit. That is why the name sync, because it is in sync with the Earth's speed. And geostationary orbit is nothing but a one specific type of geosynchronous orbit, which is with tune with the equator. That orbit, that geosynchronous orbit which is in tune with the equator, is known as the geostationary orbit. So I hope these two orbits are clear, and henceforth whenever this name comes in the newspaper, you're able to make sense of it, that geosynchronous is basically that orbit, the satellite placed on which matches the speed of Earth's rotation, and geostationary is that particular geosynchronous orbit which is in line with the equator. So in these two orbits, the satellites are going to be there, 4 in the geosynchronous and 3 in the geostationary orbits. So these are the orbits. Now when these satellites would be placed and the system runs, what are its applications? Right? They ought to have certain applications. The GPS that we use, the location services that we use, have certain many number of applications, which is either in terrestrial, aerial, marine navigation. We can use for navigation in all these areas. Disaster management, predicting disasters that are coming, predicting cyclones, predicting tsunamis, vehicle tracking, and fleet management. Right? We use location services when we drive. Integration with mobile phones. This is the area that is in contention of the article, wherein the mobile phone companies are complaining about shifting to this navigation system. We'll take a look at that issue. The other application is that it gives precise timing, mapping and geodetic data capture, terrestrial navigation aid for hikers and travelers, and visual and voice navigation for drivers. These are the multiple applications that are there of the system. And apart from these applications, can there be any benefits of India devising an indigenous navigation system and not relying on the foreign navigation system? There are several benefits for this. The significance is that if India manufactures and settles its own system, it makes for higher revenue generation. Then it also is a sign of technological innovation. Where India has its own system, it can improve its technological innovation. It increases the devices' interoperability among them, and most importantly, India become the net security providers. So rather than relying on other regions' navigation services, by relying on its own services, it can also provide security to other nations and also protect its own security and applications in its own sector. So these are the significance of, one can say, what is the significance of having one's own country's own indigenous navigation system. So this was our discussion today, and when we talk about which other countries have the navigation system, India has now become the 6th country to have a navigation system. The other 5 being USA, whose system is known as GPS, Russia, whose system is known as GLONASS, European region or European Union, the system is known as Galileo. Then China also has its own satellite system which is known as BeiDou, and now India's IRMSS. The other country which is not mentioned over here is Japan. So India has become the only 6th country in the world to have its own navigation system, and one can see, one can gauge the level of accuracy of these countries as to how they are operating. So US has launched 31 satellites, we are launching 7, US has launched 31, Russia has launched 24, European Union has proposed to launch 40, out of which 10 are in orbit. Similarly, China is also planning to launch 35, of which 20 are in orbit. So these countries' navigation system are much more, one can say, extensive, and India is only starting, which it will enhance its system afterwards. So this was the discussion on the NavIC system, the navigation system, and we finish our articles for the day over here, and we'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles from the newspaper. Thank you.